In an extraordinary moment of moral clarity at the United Nations, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago delivered a shocking, scripture-for-scripture reply to Donald Trump's use of the Bible to justify harsh immigration policies. Her response didn't just challenge his politics, it challenged his theology. The atmosphere in the United Nations chamber was electric, thick with anticipation and tension. Delegates from every corner of the globe sat upright, their attention fixed on the podium. Moments earlier, a statement had been made that reverberated through the hall, challenging not just political alliances, but the very moral compass of the assembly. Now, all eyes turned to the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who was about to deliver a reply that would echo far beyond these walls. Here is the shocking reply. The Prime Minister began her response with a measured calm, acknowledging the gravity of the moment. She referenced President Donald Trump's earlier citation of Romans 13, a passage from the New Testament that has, throughout history, been invoked by leaders to justify obedience to governing authorities. The Prime Minister's tone was respectful, yet there was a subtle firmness in her words, as if she was preparing to challenge not just the statement, but the very foundation upon which it rested. She reminded the Assembly that Romans 13 has often been used by those in power to demand compliance, to insist that citizens must submit to the rule of law, no matter the circumstances. But, she implied, Scripture is not so easily reduced to a single verse or a convenient slogan. With deliberate grace, the Prime Minister reached beneath the podium and produced her own Bible. The gesture was simple, yet profoundly symbolic. In that moment, the chamber seemed to pause, the weight of history, faith, and power converging in a single act. She held up her own Bible, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. The words within these pages belong to all, not just the powerful. The room was silent, the significance of her gesture unmistakable. It was a call to remember the true purpose of Scripture, not as a tool for domination, but as a guide for compassion and justice. She opened the Bible to the book of Romans, but not to the 13th chapter. Instead, her finger traced the words of chapter 12, her voice steady and clear as she read aloud. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Romans 12:13. The words hung in the air, a gentle yet powerful rebuke to those who would use Scripture to justify exclusion or indifference. The Prime Minister continued, explaining that the teachings of the Bible are not meant to be cherry-picked to suit the needs of the powerful. Instead, they are a call to action, a call to care for the vulnerable, to open our doors to those in need, and to practice true hospitality. Her message was unmistakable. Faith is not about blind obedience to authority, but about living out the values of compassion, generosity, and justice. The Prime Minister's voice grew stronger as she addressed the heart of the matter. You cannot cite the 13th chapter and ignore the 12th, she declared, her words ringing with conviction. It was a direct challenge to the selective use of Scripture, a practice as old as politics itself. She reminded the Assembly that the Bible is a tapestry of teachings, each thread woven together to create a picture of what it means to live a life of faith. To focus on obedience while neglecting compassion is to miss the very essence of the message. The Prime Minister urged her fellow leaders to consider the full context of Scripture, to resist the temptation to use holy texts as shields for their own interests, and instead to embrace the call to serve others. The Bible is not a buffet for the powerful to choose, only the verses that serve their might, she concluded, her words resonating with a quiet authority. In that moment, the chamber was reminded that faith, at its core, is not about wielding power, but about serving others. The Prime Minister's reply was more than a rebuttal. It was a call to conscience, a plea for integrity in both faith and governance. As the echoes of her words faded, the world was left to ponder. What does it truly mean to lead with both strength and compassion? And how might we, as a global community, ensure that the sacred texts we hold dear are used not to divide, but to unite us in our shared humanity? In a moment that would echo far beyond the walls of the United Nations, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago stood before the world's assembled leaders. Her voice, steady and resolute, cut through the diplomatic formalities, carrying with it the weight of history and the hope of a nation. She spoke not just as a representative of her country, but as a moral compass guiding the conversation toward a higher ground. The chamber, often filled with the hum of political maneuvering, fell silent as she began to speak. Her words, carefully chosen and deeply rooted in faith, resonated with a clarity that demanded attention. This was not merely a political address, it was a call to conscience, a reminder of the values that bind humanity together. She then delivered the theological crescendo, turning her attention to a figure who had often dominated headlines and shaped global discourse. She addressed the former President of the United States directly. To the former President, I say this. You have often spoken of an eye for an eye. That is from the book of Exodus. Her words hung in the air, referencing a phrase that has been invoked countless times throughout history, often to justify retribution or harsh justice. The book of Exodus, a foundational text in the Judeo-Christian tradition, is frequently cited in discussions of law, morality, and the nature of justice itself. Yet, as she pointed out, the story does not end there. The Prime Minister's invocation of this ancient scripture was not meant to condemn, but to illuminate a deeper truth, a truth that is often overlooked in the heat of political debate. She challenged the former president, and by extension, all who listened, to look beyond the surface of these words and to seek the wisdom that lies in the broader narrative of faith. With a gentle yet firm tone, she continued, "But have you, sir, ever read the very next book? Leviticus 19:34 commands, 'The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt.'" In that moment, she reminded the world that the scriptures, so often used to justify division, also contain powerful calls for compassion, empathy, and inclusion. The passage from Leviticus is a direct challenge to the notion of exclusion and otherness. It is a commandment that transcends time and place, urging us to recognize the humanity in every person, regardless of their origin. The Prime Minister's words were a powerful reminder that faith, when interpreted with an open heart, can be a force for unity rather than division. She called upon the assembled leaders to remember their own histories, to recall the times when their ancestors were strangers in a foreign land, and to extend the same kindness and acceptance to those who seek refuge today. Her message was clear. The true test of a nation's character lies not in how it treats the powerful, but in how it welcomes the vulnerable. "We are a nation built by the descendants of the foreigner, the enslaved, and the indentured," she declared, her voice filled with pride and conviction. Trinidad and Tobago's story is one of resilience and transformation, a tapestry woven from the threads of many cultures, languages, and faiths. The islands have long been a crossroads of migration, a place where people from Africa, India, China, Europe, and the Middle East came seeking new beginnings. Some arrived in chains, others in search of opportunity, but all contributed to the rich mosaic that defines the nation today. The Prime Minister's words were not just a reflection on the past, they were a call to action for the present and the future. She urged her fellow citizens, and the world at large, to honor the sacrifices of those who came before by building a society rooted in justice, equality, and mutual respect. The legacy of the enslaved and the indentured is not one of victimhood, but of strength and perseverance. Their descendants have carried forward the traditions, values, and dreams of their ancestors, shaping a nation that stands as a beacon of hope and possibility. In Trinidad and Tobago, diversity is not merely tolerated, it is celebrated. The streets are alive with the sounds of many languages, the aromas of diverse cuisines, and the rhythms of music that blend influences from every corner of the globe. This vibrant multiculturalism is a testament to the power of inclusion and the enduring spirit of the people. We know these verses by heart because we live them. In Trinidad and Tobago, the teachings of compassion, hospitality, and love for the stranger are not abstract ideals. They are woven into the fabric of daily life. Families gather to share meals and stories, neighbors look out for one another, and communities come together to celebrate both their differences and their shared humanity. The Prime Minister's message was a powerful affirmation of the values that have sustained her nation through times of hardship and triumph. She reminded the world that faith is not just a matter of words, but of actions. It is lived out in the choices we make, the kindness we show, and the justice we pursue. As the assembly listened, the significance of her words became clear. In a world often divided by fear and suspicion, the true measure of greatness lies in our ability to embrace the stranger, to lift up the downtrodden, and to build bridges of understanding across every boundary. The Prime Minister's address was more than a speech. It was an invitation to reclaim faith as a force for good, to remember the sacred duty we all share to love our neighbors as ourselves, and to create a future where every person is welcomed with dignity and respect. The chamber fell into a stunned silence as she concluded, her voice unwavering, her message echoing through the marble halls. Do not use our holy book to build walls. In that instant the air seemed to thicken, as if the very oxygen in the room was charged with the gravity of her words. Delegates from every corner of the globe sat motionless, their eyes fixed on the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, who had just delivered a statement that would reverberate far beyond the walls of the United Nations. The silence was not merely the absence of sound, it was a collective pause, a moment of reckoning, as centuries of tradition, faith, and politics collided in a single, unforgettable sentence. The Prime Minister's words were not just a plea, they were a challenge, a call to conscience that demanded reflection from every person present, regardless of their nation, creed, or political allegiance. In that moment, the chamber was transformed from a place of routine diplomacy into a crucible of moral clarity, where the true purpose of faith was laid bare for all to see. It was written to build bridges. With these words, she invoked the very essence of the sacred text, reminding the world that its true purpose was not to divide, but to unite. The Bible, revered by billions, has been a source of comfort, guidance, and inspiration for generations. Yet, too often, its verses have been wielded as weapons, twisted to justify exclusion, discrimination, and even violence. The Prime Minister's declaration was a powerful reminder that the core message of the Holy Book is one of love, compassion, and reconciliation. She spoke not only to the assembled leaders but to all those watching around the world, urging them to remember that faith is meant to bring people together, to heal wounds, and to foster understanding across even the deepest divides. The image of a bridge, spanning chasms, connecting distant shores, became a living metaphor for the role of religion in a fractured world. In that moment, the chamber was invited to imagine a future where faith is a force for unity, not division, for hope, not fear. In this very room we are commanded to be our brother's keeper, not our brother's jailer. The shockwave was immediate. The Prime Minister's words cut through the usual diplomatic formalities, striking at the heart of what it means to be part of a global community. The phrase, brother's keeper, is more than a biblical reference. It is a moral imperative, a call to empathy and responsibility that transcends borders and ideologies. As the delegates absorbed her message, the weight of their own responsibilities became palpable. They were reminded that their decisions have real consequences for millions of lives, and that the true test of leadership is not in the exercise of power, but in the willingness to protect and uplift the vulnerable. The chamber, so often a stage for political posturing, was suddenly transformed into a forum for ethical reflection. The Prime Minister's challenge was clear. Would the world's leaders choose to build prisons of fear and suspicion, or would they become guardians of hope and solidarity? The answer, she implied, would define not only their legacy, but the future of humanity itself. She had used the same source text to construct a devastating rebuttal centered on compassion and historical memory, exposing a selective and politicized interpretation. In doing so, she illuminated a truth that is often overlooked, that the power of Scripture lies not in its ability to justify our prejudices, but in its capacity to challenge us to be better, kinder, and more just. The Prime Minister's speech was a masterclass in rhetorical strategy, turning the very words that had been used to exclude into a rallying cry for inclusion. She reminded the world that history is replete with examples of faith being co-opted for political ends, but also with moments when courageous individuals have reclaimed it for the cause of justice. Her invocation of historical memory was a call to humility, a reminder that the lessons of the past must inform the choices of the present. By grounding her argument in both scripture and history, she exposed the dangers of selective interpretation and the urgent need for a more honest, compassionate engagement with our shared traditions. The impact of her words was immediate and profound, sparking conversations not only in the chamber, but in living rooms, classrooms, and places of worship around the world. It was a profound, fearless reclaiming of faith from the hands of political power. In a world where religion is so often manipulated to serve narrow interests, the Prime Minister's speech was a bold assertion that faith belongs to the people, to those who seek justice, mercy, and peace. Her words resonated far beyond the diplomatic elite, touching the hearts of ordinary people who have long yearned for a more inclusive, compassionate vision of spirituality. The act of releasing a dove, a universal symbol of peace, captured the essence of her message, that true faith is not about domination or exclusion, but about liberation and reconciliation. The Trinidad and Tobago flag, waving proudly outside the UN, became a symbol of hope for all those who believe that another world is possible, a world where the power of faith is harnessed not to divide, but to unite. The Prime Minister's courage in speaking truth to power inspired countless others to find their own voices, to stand up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. Her speech was a reminder that the struggle for justice is never easy, but that it is always worth fighting for. To witness this historic moment of moral authority and its stunning theological counter-argument, you need to see it. The world watched as a leader from a small island nation stood before the most powerful assembly on earth and spoke truth to power with unwavering conviction. Her words were not just a rebuttal, they were a vision for a better future, one in which faith is reclaimed as a force for good. The global response was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, social media erupted with messages of support, and people everywhere found themselves inspired to reflect on their own beliefs and actions. The Prime Minister's speech became a touchstone for conversations about the role of religion in public life, the responsibilities of leadership, and the enduring power of moral courage. In a time of deep division and uncertainty, her message offered a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, it is possible to choose compassion over fear, unity over division, and justice over expediency. The world will remember this day not only for the words that were spoken, but for the courage it took to speak them. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our essential guides and updates on the moments that redefine global discourse. By joining our community, you become part of a movement dedicated to shining a light on the stories that matter most. Stories of courage, conviction, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Stay informed, stay inspired, and help us amplify the voices that are changing the world, one historic moment at a time. Your engagement ensures that these powerful narratives reach even more people, sparking conversations and actions that can shape the future. Don't just witness history, be a part of it. Subscribe now, and together, let's continue to explore the events and ideas that challenge us to think deeper, act bolder, and build a more compassionate world for all.